Hello, hi, my name's Ollie and this is Bookdraw. So today I'm reviewing Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit by Jeanette Winterson. This story was first published in 1985, which I think is quite important because it gives context for the time that it was actually set. This is a fictional novel, it's not a memoir, she's very explicit about that, and that's partly because she's also written a memoir called Why Be Happy When You Can Be Normal, which is directly a memoir of her story, whereas this has magical elements, it talks about fairy tales, and although bits are rooted in her own history, it is a fictitious story, it's not her memoir. That is the other book. And she's also in interviews described as Sexing the Cherry is more explicitly referencing her actual past. So it's kind of interesting to me that there are these stories out there which are all either interwoven into her own personal history or are directly her history, but they're not her history. I was just kind of interested in that in general. This story in itself is actually about a character called Jeanette, is raised in this small religious village, and she's part of this Pentecostal church, and she wants to become a missionary. And I think part of that's about how she's brought up by her mother, how she's encouraged to have a deep faith and a love of God, and her aspiration is to change the world, which is very much informed by her mother's view of the world. And at the start of the book is broken up into the different books in terms of reference to the Bible stories. So it starts with Genesis, and the mum says how she wants her to, they are going to change the world. It then goes into an Exodus, which starts to outline her journey, and then as it progresses through, it ends with the story of Ruth. And Ruth is one of the few female characters within the Bible, and I think that is a reference to representation of women within the church, because there's a lot of narrative which is wrapped up around the teachings of John in terms of the roles of women and how there's tension and play within that. And Jeanette is challenging a lot of those roles and a lot of those views within what she does and how she behaves, and how the village reacted to that, which I think is really powerful and interesting, especially as someone who also grew up from a small town. Although I'm based in Manchester now, I grew up in a small town in the southwest of England, and I can identify with how people around me in the late 90s, instead of like 85 when I was born, how they were treating me just because of my sexual identity. I was not as confident or as forthright in my thoughts or the way I held myself in the way that Jeanette does. I think she's a real champion and role model for dealing with conflict, holding to your own principles, and being able to make decisions and challenge other people's perspectives which are put upon you. And I think that's a really important aspect to the story and the way it's told. So the focus of the little artwork which I did in response to it, the Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, is where Jeanette is held in confinement after having a very public outing in the church, having an argument with the pastor about how she has how she loves Melanie, who's her very close friend. They're not described as being in a lesbian relationship, they're just women who love women, and I think that's again reflective of the time. You don't have any kind of clearer detail than that. It's just that from a very innocent and pure perspective, she loves this woman, and the pastor tells them that they're sinful and lustful and they should be ashamed, and she reacts against him and says, "To the pure all things are pure." And it's a beautiful inner strength that comes out in that moment, which I really was like, yeah, that's cool. Whereas the mum is in line with the pastor and some of the other villagers about the roles and ways she should be behaving. So Jeanette is held in confinement for over 30 hours by herself, and she ends up having either fantasies or an intervention, and it's not explicit which she's doing. I like to think that she's probably just having a bit of an emotional meltdown by herself, and has created this little fictitious, beguiling orange demon who's trying to charm and persuade her to make a choice between being a badass deviant or being a controlled goody-goody in one way or another. Or it could be magical realism, where she's actually having a direct intervention from one of Satan's demons, and I think that'd be pretty cool as well. But it was such a kind of juicy visual moment which I really felt compelled to actually embrace and explore further. So the image is her kind of losing it, basically, in that moment where she's held in confinement and she's forced to reflect on her thoughts of Melanie and her thoughts on the church and what it means to her. It's kind of a key moment in terms of what choices she makes in the second half of the book. The character that I used in the form of reference is actually a person. She has her own channel, and her name's Fiona, from Fiona's Fictions. Her channel is brilliant. I actually found it when I was doing research for Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. I felt really inspired by what she was saying within her video, and incorporate her into the image, because she kind of works so well for that character. And then I asked her if she minded, and she was happy to, which is really cool. Thank you very much. So I just want to encourage people to check out her channel, because she's really lovely personality, really easy to watch. Fiona is a writer herself. She's written a new story, which is The Pigeon City. She's always very opening. She says, hello there, fair viewers. And she has lovely little chats about books. And I will add some links below to her channel for you to check out. If you're a YouTuber or a person who enjoys looking at queer fiction, and you think you look like a character, please get in contact with me, because I will continue to be reading you books, and if you want to pose as one of those people, we can have a conversation after I've read the book and incorporate you into an image. I think that'd be a great way forward. Touching on Fiona's review, she talks about how there are passages in the story which are peppered with these fairy tales, and they're very detracting from the actual story, and I completely agree. In terms of if you're reading it through, you're kind of
like, what? Why are we talking about Prince now?
But then I thought about it more, and the fairy tales seem to be used as a coping mechanism for what Jeanette is going through. So as a young person, she's trying to express how she is feeling in terms of the relationship with her mother, the relationship with the church, the relationship with the village, and the fairy tales are a method of her exploring those issues within there. So for example, there's a story of a young prince who wants to find the perfect woman, and when he actually comes across her, she turns out to be really rude and defiant, and he ends up getting really frustrated with her, and instead of trying to work with her, ends up chopping off her head. And as a consequence, the whole village is drowned in the blood from her body, and he manages to escape by climbing up a tree. And so as another beautiful visual reference, I incorporated that into the actual image as well, because I just loved that idea. But I also think it's important in terms of relationship between Jeanette and the mum, because I think the prince is reflecting the mother's character in the way that she wants Jeanette to be the perfect child, and Jeanette can't be, because of her sexuality, because she's flawed, because she's a human being. She will never live up to the standards that the mother is expecting from her. So those fairy tales do create this narrative alongside the main story, in terms of it describing what's going on inside Jeanette's head and how she's coping with that situation, which I think is a really interesting storytelling method, and I've not really seen that in other stories before. It was interesting, I was watching an interview with the writer Jeanette Winterson, and she described how storytelling is like walking into a forest which opens up one day and then closes the next, and after walking through it you wonder what happened. And I thought it was a beautiful kind of analogy of reading a book and being absorbed into a world. So that is probably enough in terms of what I wanted to chat about in terms of the book. I hope that you check it out because it is a cracking read. I think for the time that it was framed in 1985, that must have been really challenging. It must have been really quite progressive. Just as a person now reading it, I wish I had access to that story when I was younger, when I wasn't confident about my identity, and it would give me a champion and someone who was encouraging me to think in a different way and to believe in myself and to believe in my choices. And I think her novel is really empowering in that sense. If you like this, give me a thumbs up, click the subscribe button and you'll see more material. If you want to see upcoming content in terms of new videos that I'll be making, check out my Instagram account. I've got different images coming through there more regularly. And go onto my Facebook group if you want to see quotes, which are my favourite quotes from the story, and also other fan work. There's also a space for you if you want to put your own fan work there. It'd be great to see other people contribute, that'd be lovely. Otherwise you can also check me out on Twitter. Anyway, I've had fun talking through Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. If you have your own comments about it, do you like the fairy tales? I think that's a bit of a contentious area for people. Did you like other elements of it? What were your favourite villagers? I loved Mrs. White. I thought she was hilarious. I thought it was hilarious when she heard some noises next door. That was amazing. Okay, this is probably enough from me. See you next time. Bye.
Subscribe!